The following is a special presentation from the Pro Wrestling Report.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special edition of the Pro Wrestling Report. Dameon Nelson here in the PWR studios, and I'm joined by a very special guest making his very first appearance on this program. And it's a man who is always surrounded by a ton of controversy and a man who you have had many questions and comments about and for here to PWR. So without further ado, welcome Vince Russo, the infamous Vince Russo, here to the Pro Wrestling Report. How are you, Vince?
I'm here, and I'm happy to be here. I guess you must be the infamous Dameon.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Been enjoying the things we've seen over at pyroandballyhoo.com and also on Twitter at pyroandballyhoo. You've been very vocal as of late, talking a lot about the wrestling product, and obviously for those who don't know you, your wrestling career goes back to WWE. Even before that, you spent time in World Wrestling Entertainment, spent time in TNA Wrestling, spent time back again in WCW as well. And really, though, as of late, there's been a lot of discussion, Vince, about your involvement with TNA Impact Wrestling. TNA Impact Wrestling, of course, dealing with some controversy of their own with their negotiations with Spike TV and just recently announcing the move from Thursdays to Wednesdays of Impact Wrestling on Spike TV. Unknown what's going to happen after the October 1st end of their current contract. But when the news broke of the negotiations breaking down, a lot of people attributed it to the fact that you, Vince Russo, were secretly working for TNA Impact Wrestling. And it's a subject you addressed on your website, but why don't you give us your side of the story, your version, and all the details of what happened between you and TNA Wrestling and what involvement you did or did not have with the negotiations breaking down between them and Spike TV.
Well, you know, I actually started working as a consultant for TNA back in October. So I had been working with them as a consultant for the last 10 months. Basically, I was told by John Gaborik, who is I guess he's the vice president of talent and the creative. I'm not exactly sure what his title is. But anyway, I was told by John Gaborik that he told Spike of my involvement in working with TNA back in January. So the fact of the matter is, and to set the record straight, if John Gaborik told me the truth, and I don't have any reason to doubt that he didn't, Spike was well aware of my involvement with TNA going all the way back to January. So, so to say that Spike, found out about it at around the same time the contract negotiations broke down, that is just an untruth. And again, that is a way to point the finger at me and drag Vince Russo into the situation, much the same way, Vince Russo, killed WCW, when Vince Russo was, sitting home with post-concussion syndrome for a good part of the year.
Now, Vince, what is your relationship with Spike TV? Why would anyone jump to the conclusion, whether or not you were working for them or not, why would anyone jump to the conclusion that a network, Viacom, Spike TV, would make such a big decision based on one man? What's the backstory there?
Dameon, that's just ignorance. That's somebody that has no idea of, what a negotiation is between a network, and a show on the network. That's big business. That's billions and not billions, I'm sorry, millions and millions of dollars that goes well beyond, a Vince Russo or, they don't like the fact that, somebody's consulting for them. That's just people that really don't have an understanding of how negotiations work between a television network and a provider.
But what is your relationship with Spike TV? Do you have one?
Dameon, I can tell you this. And when I was at TNA, when I was writing for TNA, I was the head of creative when we got up to an audience of over 2 million people, and I think the rating got up to a 1.4 or something, okay? At around the same time, I found out through a third party that Spike, a representative from Spike, a high-ranking one, had made a sarcastic comment, about me. And to be honest with you, that's something that, really caught me off guard, and I really didn't understand because, as I explained to you, this is at a time when, the network and TNA was doing an all-time ratings high. The audience was larger than it's ever been. And then I find out through a third party, that sarcastically a comment is made about me that came from left field to me.
Yeah.
I tried getting to the bottom of that, to be honest with you, and I never got an answer. It was always blown off as, he didn't mean anything by it, or, that was taken out of context, or whatever the case. But that was the only sign, of any type of heat that I received as far as Spike was concerned with me. So, I mean, that really is the extent of the story that I know about.
All right, fair enough. Now, speaking of stories and a lot of internet websites reporting things, and you even mentioned it in your blog at your website, pyroandballyho.com, but there was the incident with the email that you had sent out and mistakenly sent to one of the wrestling news reporters, and that information got out. And you explained a little bit on your website about why you had to, address that error as you did because of the secret state of your employment with TNA Wrestling. But tell us a little bit more about that. How did it happen? What were the ramifications? And why did you have to say that you didn't do it?
Well, Dameon, to be honest, I was told from the get-go, at the very start, from TNA, that my relationship with them was going to be secretive. Nobody was going to know about it, and I didn't like that from the get-go. I don't believe in being dishonest and not being open and having to hide things. I don't like that, and I felt very uncomfortable from the beginning. But the fact of the matter is, that's what Dixie Carter wanted. So, I did my best for 10 months to live up to what she asked of me, whether I agreed with it or not.
Why do you think she wanted to keep it a secret?
Dameon, I'm gonna tell you what I think. Okay. At the beginning, when they first signed me on as a consultant, okay, Eric Bischoff was still hands-on with the product. Mm-hmm. So when I was told this from the beginning, I assumed, this is my assumption now, that Dixie just did not want Eric Bischoff to know that Vince was back involved with the product. That was my assumption. Well, as everybody knows, soon thereafter, Eric Bischoff was sent home.
Right.
But yet the secret still remained. And my feeling, and Dameon, I can be completely off about this. I'm just going on what I think and what my opinion is. I honestly think that Dixie was afraid of what the feedback might have been from the internet community about Vince Russo being back involved with TNA Wrestling. Now that's just my opinion. I have that's not based on any fact. That's just kind of my gut feeling.
Well, and
if anybody wants to know the answer to that, I mean, Dixie Carter's the person you have to ask.
And it's no secret, Dixie Carter does pay a lot of attention to what the fans are saying on the internet, and a lot of decisions are made based off of a lot of that feedback, which is not necessarily saying it's good or bad. But to that point, Vince Russo, for whatever reason, you have a lot of critics. And a lot of people will automatically blame something that is either happening now, in the case of the TNA Spike TV situation, or things in the past, on you. Fire Vince Russo. We've heard those chants. What would you like to say to address those critics who, many of them have not necessarily gotten the chance to hear you on some of the podcasts you've done, listen to your own podcast, and get your side of those same stories? They're going with what they've been told has happened or is happening. But what would you like to say to those critics?
Yeah, Dameon, let's clarify that first, because, unlike what you're doing with me right now, I started with the WWE in, I think, 1993. And, so basically, like, for the last 20 years, I've been involved in, professional wrestling / sports entertainment. Dameon, I can count a handful of times when representatives from the internet wrestling community actually approached me and asked me a question. Okay, everything was their opinion, rumor of her and hearsay, what they heard secondhand, what this source that nobody ever knows, tells them. Nobody would ever dare confront me, as you and I are having this conversation now. The problem was simple. It was always this simple. The internet wrestling community is a small percentage of the audience. My job throughout my entire career was to try to achieve the highest rating I possibly could. When you're talking about high ratings, you're talking about the appeal of the masses. Now, when you want to go after the masses, you're not particularly doing things the way the internet wrestling community wants you to do them. You're really more or less going after a broader appeal of that casual fan. So in other words, since I didn't represent wrestling the way they wanted it represented or the way they felt it should be represented, then that turned into the personal attacks of, I'm a moron, I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm doing, while meanwhile, a lot of times when I was involved in the business, the ratings were at an all-time high. The ratings were at an all-time high basically because we were going after a casual audience. Right. And the casual audience was buying it. That's the reason. It's not that, Vince Russo was this, genius. No, we just broadened the appeal of wrestling and more people came to the table. It's really that simple.
Here's an interesting perspective, or a different way of looking at it perhaps, is a lot of these same fans who blame you, Vince Russo, for a lot of the bad things that have happened in professional wrestling are a lot of the same people that ask for the return of the Attitude Era, of which you played a critical role. It's sort of, okay, so is Vince Russo good or is Vince Russo bad?
Well, yeah, that's exactly. And, Dameon, at the end of the day, I'll be honest with you, bro, I hate talking about the Attitude Era. I'm sick of talking about it. But, I equate it to, like, Dameon, if you're a Toronto's Blue Jay fan, you're still talking about Joe Carter's home run in 1992 because there's nothing new to talk about. Right. And that's why everybody talks about the Attitude Era, because right now there's nothing to talk about. Yeah. But me, like everybody else, I would love to see that era of wrestling return. That's when wrestling was great. That's when wrestling was cool. That's when the entire world was tuning in every Monday night. Me more than anybody wants to see that happen again.
But was it sustainable? A lot of people say that the Attitude Era, and even going back to things like ECW and a lot of the, for lack of a better word, extreme things that happen in wrestling, actually ruined wrestling for right now.
That's ridiculous. I mean, Dameon, it's absolutely ridiculous. Yes, it's sustainable if the right people are involved and the right people are writing it. Here's what happened with the WWE. It's this simple. When Ed Ferraro and myself came on as writers and we were writing for the Attitude Era, we were not subjects of that world. We did not grow up in the wrestling business. We were wrestling fans and writers. So we had a whole new perspective. The problem is when we left, and we were no longer there, the WWE went back to what they knew, and that was wrestling. And here we are 15 years later, they're still doing wrestling. Wrestling's only going to draw you a very small audience. Right. If you want to get that, 6 million people back on a Monday night or whatever it is, you've got to open that span and open that horizon back up. Nobody's doing that.
Why didn't it happen? And all those points are incredibly valid. But why didn't it happen in WCW? Why couldn't you replicate the success in WWE that you in WCW when you went over there?
Dameon, there's no question in my mind whatsoever that we were. Nobody wants to talk about numbers. Nobody wants to talk about facts. Look at the first 3 months when Ed Ferraro and myself went to WCW. It was from October of 99 through January of 2000. Look at the numbers. There's no question in my mind that those 3 months we were definitely on the right track. Well, what happened, of course, is, the politics kicked in, all that BS kicked in. They decided to go in a different direction, even though the ratings were on the uptick. I went home. They called me back 3 months later because we had already lost the audience we had built the 3 months prior. And even at that point, I knew going back, we're never going to get those people back. We had them. Right. We were building something for 3 months. Over the course of the last 3 months, they've completely destroyed it. We're never going to get those people back. I knew that going in my second tenure in WCW.
TNA, Impact Wrestling. You're no longer involved with them. You publicly stated that you had departed the company a couple of weeks back. They are clearly at a crossroads right now. What is your recommendation? What are your thoughts on the next steps for TNA? Are they dead if they don't get this TV deal renewed with Spike TV?
Dameon, here's the truth, and I am so happy for the first time in I don't know how long that I can say what's on my mind, because I feel like the Hannibal Lecter when they had him on the hand truck and his mouth was wired shut. I felt that way for so long, and that's not who Vince Russo is.
Right.
And there's so much that I had to hold inside, and I'm just going to say this out, period. And I said these exact words to Spike TV. I'm sorry, not Spike TV, to TNA, okay? Spike TV is a horrible partner. Why in the world TNA would want to re-partner without Spike unless there were no other options? If Spike TV were the only option to stay on television, I understand it and I get it. But they are a horrible partner. They know nothing about the wrestling business. The way they promoted and marketing and advertised the show over the years was absolutely atrocious. And you got to understand, Dameon, I'm in a seat where I can discuss that because I worked with the USA Network.
Right.
I worked with Bonnie Hammer, who was absolutely phenomenal. She was the female version of Vince McMahon. So when you had Bonnie Hammer at the USA Network and Vince McMahon, the sky was the limit. Spike is a horrible television partner. TNA, if they sign a contract with Spike, great for them. They've got 2 more years. Everybody will make a living. That product will not grow with Spike TV. My hope and prayer is that a new partner will come along for TNA that will embrace the product and put the money needed in the product and the investment in the product so TNA can grow. With Spike TV, TNA will never grow.
Fair enough, but without Spike TV, will TNA die?
If there's not another partner, obviously yes. I mean, if somebody else isn't out there, willing to put them on their air, I don't see how they stay in business. I mean, unless there's something going on that I don't know about, I don't know how they stay in business. But, again, my hope, and I got a lot of friends in that company, right, people I really care. Man, I just hope, and I've said this on my website, that just somebody else comes along that's going to embrace them. That's what they need.
What's your relationship like with Dixie Carter today?
You know what? I tell you, Dameon, Dixie and I have gone through so much. People don't forget, I worked with Dixie for over 10 years. And I was always the guy that was there while she was bringing in, new leader after new leader after new leader. And I just sat back and I just watched everything that happened, knowing in my mind where this thing was going and where it was heading. but just, continuing to do my job, because my job was the television show. That's all it was. So I never got involved. So I always took on the attitude of protecting Dixie Carter and looking out for Dixie's best interest. And I think deep down inside, like, Dixie knows that. I really believe that she knows that. And that's why I think there will always be a relationship and a bond there between me and Dixie, because I wasn't one of these guys looking for power or looking to be in charge. I was one of these guys that wanted to have the best television show, but also try to look out for her best interest and protect her. So I always think there's going to be that bond there, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Was the introduction of Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff a mistake for TNA Wrestling?
Dameon, what that really comes down to, honestly, is dollars and cents. I don't know what they were paid. I honestly don't know what they were paid. Also, Dameon, I don't know the effect it had on, like, overseas markets. I don't know how much business they were able to attain with the Hulk Hogan name. I wasn't privy to any of that because, like I said, I was always just busy writing my television show. But, for the impact and the difference that it had on the week-to-week television show, I think it's fair to say that it just wasn't there. But I also think it's fair to say, Dameon, that I don't think there's one guy that's bigger than the wrestling business or has ever been bigger than the wrestling business. I mean, let's face it, Vince went on after Hogan. Vince went on after The Rock. Vince went on after Austin. So for anybody to think you were going to bring in Hulk Hogan and all of a sudden this thing's going to go from like a 1.4 where we were to a 2.4 or a 3, it doesn't work that way. I don't think anybody, has that kind of power. But so I don't think it made the difference, in the impact of the product that some people thought. I never thought it was going to from the get-go, to really be honest with you.
Now, you did briefly return to WWE after your time in WCW. And that return, you said, was eye-opening in the way that things had changed. Tell us a little bit more about, in those couple of years, the differences that you noticed in the WWE you were in and a major part of, and the one you briefly returned to.
Dameon, there are so many things that are obvious to me, like on the outside looking in. And I think part of the problem is those on the inside are so close to it and so close to churning product every week that they don't see it. I had a conversation with JR the other day, and this literally was confirmed in an interview a couple of days ago by Triple H, stating that right now there are 20 to 30 writers at the WWE. How can you have that many people write a successful and compelling television show on a weekly basis with so much little time to work on it? It's absolutely impossible. You've got 30 people involved. They've got to put out 5 hours worth of programming a week. They're constantly running into each other. Everybody's got to hear everybody else's ideas.
Right.
How can you possibly come up with any type of a good product in that structure? Again, going back to the Attitude Era, which I hate talking about, it was me and Ed Ferrara in a room watching the Jerry Springer show, two guys with a lot in common from the East Coast, looking each other in the eye, back and forth. Boom, we write the show right there and deliver it to Vince McMahon. End of story. I don't know how you have the same vision with so many people involved. It's impossible.
And it's interesting when you look at it from that perspective, especially if you look at what's going on down in Florida for NXT, where there are 1 or 2 people who are running that organization from beginning to end. You go back to even the days before the Attitude Era, where it was, let's say, Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson. You go back to when it was Dusty Rhodes and one other person in WCW or NWA or whatever it might be. You talk about the Attitude Era. Why is it seemingly so obvious that there are too many cooks in the kitchen, yet the wrestling companies right now feel that that's the direction to go in?
They don't feel it's the direction to go in. Let me tell you exactly what happened, okay? Dameon, me and Ed Ferrara, we were writers. That's what we were. We were writers. We came into the wrestling business as writers. If you know my background, I was the editor of the WWE magazine. That's how I got the job. I am a writer. So we came into that show as writers, okay? You have a situation right now, and I love Triple H to death. I love the guy. I've got all the respect in the world for him. Everybody thinks they can be a writer. No, you can't be. It's the equivalent of me telling Triple H, a Hunter, I can go in the ring right now and have just as good a match as you can. I'm going to be a wrestler today. No, it doesn't work that way. Hunter's a wrestler. He's not a writer. So what Hunter has to do is he has to hire writers. And from his perspective, the more writers he's hiring, the more ideas they're going to give him. That's why there are so many writers, opposed to hiring one or two really good key writers who know wrestling, okay, and then letting them run with it, not being in control of every single word that is written. Vince McMahon wasn't in control of when Ed and I were writing. We wrote the best show possible on our own. Then we brought it to Vince, and at that point, Vince tweaked it. But, you know, you got somebody now in Hunter that, with all due respect, isn't a writer. So he's got to bring in all these writers to get those ideas. And at the end of the day, it's just a big waste of time.
Now, was Vince McMahon a writer?
Vince McMahon wasn't a writer, but he never claimed to be.
Right.
I think Vince McMahon himself would be the first one to tell you, if you give him a blank sheet of paper, he is absolutely lost. I think he'd be the first one to tell you that.
Yeah.
So Vince McMahon never made believe he was a writer. What he needed was for us to write the show, and then look at the show from the perspective of two writers, and then within that framework, make the tweaks and the little changes he wanted to make within that script.
Right.
And that's exactly what Vince did.
Well, Vince Russo, a very enlightening conversation here with you. It's the first time we've actually spoken, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. But in closing, what final words do you have for the fans watching this? What questions about Vince Russo do you feel you have not yet answered that you would like to answer to them? And what is next? I know you've got a couple of projects, including another book coming out soon. What is next for Vince Russo?
Oh, well, I'll get into what's next, Slash. To address what you just said, I love the fact that, you know, I'm 53 years old. I've been a fan of wrestling probably since I'm 13. So that's a good 40 years, okay? I love the fact that right now I can sit back and be a fan of wrestling. And I'll tell you what, as a fan of wrestling, I'm not going to sit back and keep my mouth shut about the utter nonsense and boring BS that I watch every Monday night. Because the fact of the matter is this, okay? It's really this simple. The WWE signed a contract with USA Network to get 3 hours on Monday night. Okay, they got a check to give USA Network 3 hours of programming. At the end of the day, the product, A, doesn't warrant 3 hours of programming, and B, it's almost impossible to write a compelling show in 3 hours, and nobody has that type of patience anymore where they're literally going to sit there and watch a 3 hour show. And I've said this all along. It's not against WWE. I don't care what you put on there for 3 hours. I'm not watching it for 3 hours. So basically what they've done is they've taken a 3 hour show, and from the beginning to the end, everything gets stretched out to nauseam. The matches get stretched out. The recaps get stretched out. There are commercial breaks during every single wrestling match. It's horrible to watch. And you know what? As a wrestling fan, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to pound my fist on the desk, and I'm going to say, I want to see better. I don't care that USA is paying you for 3 hours. Right. I'm not going to sit here and watch crap and be bored out of my mind every Monday night. So I'm going to pound on my desk till either you tell USA, thank you, but no thanks, because we cannot write a compelling 3-hour show, or something. So I'm going to be the voice of the wrestling fan. Now that I'm in touch with them and I know what they're thinking and how they're feeling, I'm not going to be afraid to say that. As far as where I go from here, pyroandballyhoo.com, that is my passion. That's what I've always wanted to do. Like I said, for the last 20 years, I haven't been able to say what is openly and freely on my mind without consequences, or having somebody yell at me or, hit me with a ruler on the knuckles like I was a child. I finally have the freedom to say whatever it is that I want to say. And as far as wrestling goes, I make this perfectly clear. Good or bad, I'm going to say it. There are a lot of things about the WWE show that I like. I love Bray Wyatt. I love his act. I love Dolph Ziggler. There's a lot of stuff that I like. So, good or bad, I'm going to talk about it. But now I finally have the opportunity, no handcuffs on, anything goes, and I'm going to be the voice of the fans. When the WWE is screwing up, I'm going to be the first to tell them they're screwing up.
And Vince Russo, it's great to be able to hear you and to hear you speak so openly and candidly. I'm glad you have that opportunity. And really, thank you for joining us here on PWR and speaking to the masses, if you will. I've heard so many skewed opinions and so many strong opinions about Vince Russo. To be able to actually have a conversation with you and talk it out, if you will, really puts a different perspective on things. And there are two sides to every story, right? Sometimes three. My side, your side, and the truth. And it's good to get all those sides. And really, I wish a lot more wrestling fans would take the effort to do so. So thank you so much for joining us. And in closing, anything you'd like to say to the audience?
Yeah, no, Dameon, I'd like to say to you, I appreciate you having me on and us having this ability to, talk and have a conversation. And this is what I promote all the time. When two people can talk, you don't have to agree on everything. I mean, that's totally cool. But when you can have a conversation, like two human beings, and share your opinions and your thoughts, and especially with all of us being wrestling fans, to me, that's the most healthiest thing in the world. So I respect the fact that you had questions concerning me, and you brought me on, and you asked me yourself, and we were able to have this conversation. And, going forward, anytime you want to do this again, I'm wide open to you.
Awesome. Well, we definitely will. Vince Russo, ladies and gentlemen, one-on-one here on the Pro Wrestling Report. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all of you for watching. We'll see you again soon.